Welcome to Cinemapile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemaphilepod.com. Ghost in the Machine is a gripping and urgently relevant investigative documentary that exposes the buried history of artificial intelligence, not as a neutral system of algorithms, but as a technology shaped by racism, misogyny, eugenics, and entrenched structures of power long before it entered everyday life. I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot to talk about in this amazing documentary film called Ghost in the Machine. And we're joined today by the director of Ghost in the Machine, Valerie Veatch. Valerie, welcome to Cinemaphile.
Thank you for having me. This is really exciting.
I am so excited to talk to you about this film because it lays bare what I have gleaned and suspected, but I feel like a kind of a little bit of the village idiot running around the town square by asking these very basic questions, which you ask and which you explore in Ghost in the Machine. Tell me a little bit about what put you on to this project, and we'll get into how surprised and or not surprised you were by what you found as we progress in our conversation, but amazing film. So tell me a little bit about your origin story here.
Well, so this is my third film that I've been fortunate enough to bring to Sundance. And like my previous two films, this film asks questions around technology and society. And I think that the other two projects look at certain technologies as they're being normalized, and I sort of pull on threads. I think I was learning. I was sort of like, is technology helping us? Is it not? Like, what's going on? And with this film, a lot of those threads come together. And the context around the Silicon Valley project is shocking. And, ultimately as we see in the film, systems that are sold as being democratizing, or spaces for a community are ultimately not that. And I think it's really like important to reframe the conversation around what AI is. And this film was born out of just the kind of stark canyon between what these technologies are being sold as, like, that generative AI is somehow meant to be a filmmaking tool, was sort of my entry point into this. And then the reality, which is these systems perpetuate, a heinous bias. As we look at what's happening this week with Grok, it's not at all surprising, right? Like that these generative AI technologies are only harmful is not surprising, and that they come from harmful places is not surprising.
Well, can I just say it's been hiding in plain sight in some ways, not to in any way detract from your investigative reporting here, but it has been there. They have been pretty upfront about it. And I go back, I go back to this idea, which for me, this is my vision of AI and what the promise of. If you want to tell me it's going to dig through thousands, hundreds, millions of medical records and figure out how to cure all known diseases, knock yourself out. This is a great technology for searching through data, okay, and giving you the opportunity to look at it and say, okay, this is where we can go from here. But when we get into the realm of this is what it's going to tell us to do and how it's going to limit our lives because we have no other option in this particular technology, there are dozens of red flags flashing red all day long for me. And I, again, so tell me I'm crazy.
You're exactly right. I think that the trigger for me is this narrative of super intelligence.
Yes.
This idea that these systems can produce thought, which we totally dismantle in our film, but that these things can produce thought, that somehow that thought's going to like culminate into some sort of independently sentient system that's going to, I don't know, break free of its silicon and like, I don't know, animate itself and what? Like that doesn't make any sense. But what that idea does do is it creates an exclusion zone for regulation. Like how can you regulate super intelligence? Because the people building it are so smart, only they understand what this is. And we don't want to be the last country to build super intelligence because blah, 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 blah. And it just enables a regulatory free environment, which, as we've seen with technology all along, is a recipe for disaster. And when I see in a lot of mainstream engage stories that engage around AI, there's always this capitulation to that idea that this is an inevitable technology that's super powerful and exciting, and well, we better stand back and hold hands or whatever. And that's just not true. And so that was the driving force of this film. It's very urgent. I made it. I'm a mom. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. When I was going around to my, usual places that I would look to pitch projects, a year ago, nobody wanted to be anti-AI. It was very unfashionable because in the professional space, everybody's bosses were saying, "Oh, you better learn AI because it's going to transform our company somehow." Okay. So these people who are in decision-making roles like didn't want to seem anti-AI. They didn't want to seem like Luddites or like, they didn't want to seem like they didn't understand this revolution that was about to occur in like the world. So I just grabbed my webcam and started reading white papers and emailing people from the footnotes. Literally, I've met some of my like dearest new friends this way. That it was just kind of this like urgent, very scrappy, edited together, like in my bedroom on my vanity table in between school runs and bedtime and the summer holidays. And so the result of that is this very, somebody yesterday called it like a very punk aesthetic, which I really liked that. And it is true. And I think punk is a good word for it.
Yeah.
Punk has always been a container for the counterculture or the counter narrative. And I think that's what this film does. And I feel so proud to be able to apply my professional skills and bring something that is not the mainstream story to a space where the mainstream has to brush against it. And I'm hoping that at Sundance, a lot of the programming is focused on AI, and I think that this story complicates that narrative in a really powerful way. And I'm so excited to have these conversations. And it's a wonderful place to bring a film like this.
Yeah, and I will, just from my own personal perspective on watching the film, you can't unsee this. Once you know, and once you begin to understand William Shockley and eugenics and European racism and superiority and colonialism and all of this stuff is laid bare, and you're not pulling from tangential relationships. This is where it is. This is where it came from. With the idea of AGI is straight up eugenics, straight up European racism, colonial. It's straight up. There's not, and don't even try to hide it. And all you have to do is look at the array of people that were standing behind Trump at his inauguration. And really, it's all you need to know if you start looking. Not everyone that was sitting there is, what I'm painting a broad brush here. I know that. But you look at the key players there, and they're pretty open about where they think the world should be. And wow. Let's talk about eugenics. Let's talk about basically go back to the idea of phenology, if you will, of all of this stuff going back to the late 1800s and into the 1900s.
So there's two ways that eugenics forms the origin point. One is kind of was more obvious to me, and I understood this immediately, the concept of measurable
There you
intelligence.
go.
That intelligence is something that could be externalized and then it could be measured. And obviously, any test is going to be rigged to the person writing the test. And so one of the early IQ test questions was a cup. And it said, where does this cup belong? On a saucer, on a table, or on a horse? And so if you were a rich person, you'd be like, on a saucer, and you were brilliant and you had a high IQ. If you were a poor person who'd never seen a saucer, you're like, well, I know it doesn't go on the horse, goes on the table. Well, now you're feeble-minded and now you should be sterilized. And that was literally the mechanism by which, as we see in the film, a lot of policies in the United States around immigration and sterilization were informed. So there's that thread, right? And then there's this thread of, and this is more complex, the very nature of statistics, the very mathematical tool of statistics was invented by Carl Pearson, who was the protege of Francis Galton, building on his mathematical tools. And it was Francis Galton was looking to this French mathematician who I can't remember his name, who was looking at mountain ranges, and he was trying to find what the ideal like ratios of a mountain range should be. It's a silly project, but Francis Galton was quite inspired by that, and he thought, what if we applied that to people? And so as soon as you have an ideal data point, like the length of a nose, and then you can create data points that scatter around that, He was like, I've discovered something, a mathematical truth. We can sort of use statistics to sort of measure people. And it's that use of statistics for measurement in clustering algorithms,
Yeah.
which happen later on in various, algorithms within machine learning. And this is a point that Aubrey Clayton makes in the film. Within statistics, there's a language for correlation. We can say, this is related to this, but there's no language for causation.
There you go.
And so women have a lower IQ, not like women's, in this context, spent less time at school studying the questions that were on this test because of like,
Yeah.
horrific like gendered practices in the Victorian era. Like there wasn't any context to why these statistical patterns emerged. So when you have that, and it's not to say that like every use of statistics is toxic, obviously not. But I think that that's a really important, part of the story. And I almost didn't put that in the film for a long time because I was like, well, math is objective and it can't just be bad. But I think that's what's so cool about Aubrey Clayton's work in the film. And I think anyone should just Google all of the names of people in the film
Yeah.
because they're all so brilliant and have
Yeah.
such amazing work. But he's a mathematician, and I think that there's a lot there that's interesting in his work around how these mathematical systems aren't neutral. And we don't even get into some of the big heavy hitting characters in the 20th century because there's not time in the film who held extreme racist views and continue to be on the cover of textbooks and buildings and who set mathematical tools processes. And I would love to see kind of more work in that space of like how exactly do those things influence the resulting technologies that they're built on. But that's kind of the way that eugenics fits in the AI story. And then this concept of G, which is using the statistics to measure intelligence, and that's where we find artificial general intelligence. Angela Saini says in the film, and she's a brilliant author, she says that, the problem was the original sin of using the word intelligence to refer to machines in the first place, because it invokes, studies that were done into human intelligence, which are all based on race science.
Yeah.
So it's just very funny.
Yeah. So this predicate for what we're building and all of the different data centers, that's another whole thing that is so troubling. And I keep coming back to, so what data are they collecting? Now, I just came across another concept. I don't want to get too far down this road, but surveillance capitalism, which is a big part of AI. And that's something that's starting to percolate up into the body politic, which this is a great way in. Your film will give you the context to understand what that other part of the conversation should be about. So there's just a ton of great information in this. And I will say, maybe foolishly, that watching your film gave me a lot of hope because this bubble can be punctured. This whole mythology can be dismantled. And this is the opportunity for all the progress that has been made, halting as it may be in terms of people's rights, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, whatever it is. This is completely antithetical to all of those things. They say it out loud. They've been saying it loud and clear. But this is also a fool's errand to think that this is going to work for anybody except for the most elite people who are making tons of money off of it. End of lecture on my part, but that's how I feel. And your film gave me an opportunity to be hopeful that this is reversible. We can humanize whatever this technology might be. We can control it, what we want.
Absolutely. I think that the greatest thought crime of our era right now is the lie of superintelligence. I have a 6-year-old, who comes home and says, oh, someone in my class said they don't have to learn anything because AI is just going to do it for them. Now, where is that child hearing that? I have no idea, right? They pick up this notion in our society, and that this idea is affecting children and the way they're forming their sense of self and their agency in the world is enraging.
Yeah.
And that's why we must push back against it. We must, there's various modes of resistance. You can laugh at it, and you can also refuse to use it, the technologies that are put in front of you, but I think that the fundamental takeaway is that these systems are not thinking. They are not producing thought. And
Yeah.
that That is a very important like framing to take on it. And it gets very muddy and people get very excited, like, oh, this is the most influential technology that's ever been created. That's not true. We've just never had such giant computers, immense amounts of power. We're running out of power on the power grid. They're like all of the kind of regulatory rails have come off, and we are pumping huge, unprecedented amounts of power into unprecedented amounts of compute. And then we also have unprecedented amounts of data all stolen, but the big data scrapes.
Right.
So that's all this is. It's not new technology. It's not uniquely thinking. It's kind of the product of, deregulation in the tech world, really. Like this is sort of where it ended. But it is so sad that it's being packaged and sold as
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. Again, we're humans. We fuck shit up all the time. We're going to fuck this up. And we need to be prepared to move forward in a way that demystifies this and
Yes.
makes it something that because you can't fall back on, oh, there's just so many smart people doing this. No, this came
No.
out of the same crowd that gave us cryptocurrency. The same people who gave us pets.com back in the 90s. They changed the world. That up, they're going to f this up, and we're going to pay the price environmentally. That's the real hidden
Absolutely.
cost of this, is we're all going to be in a boatload of trouble because of the environmental damage that this thing will have done before we realize it had been done, if we don't get on this now. So there is all that you need to know in this incredible film, Ghost in the Machine. That's what you need to know. I hope that you blow this thing up, because this is really, we need another voice. We need to hear this. We have to know where we're going. Again, they're not building those data centers so we get our pizzas faster. They're building them for a reason, okay?
Oh, it's
So
horrifying.
it really is. And just look. Look at the guy who's got more money than anybody in the world, who's pushing this harder than anybody, who scraped all our data from our federal government. Look at the guy that's doing that. Look at what he is saying the quiet part out loud all the time. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I wish you all the best and all the success in the world. And if you ever want to run for president, you'll get my vote. Okay, so there you go. President of data.
Oh, well, I thank you so much for watching the film, and I'm very jazzed to like feel your excitement, and I can't wait to share this with audiences.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fun.
Valerie Veatch, thank you so very much for the film Ghost in the Machine. All the best at Sundance, and thank you for spending some time with us here on Cinemaphile.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.